At the beginning of the month, a huge amount of dead fish was found on the coast. This terrified scientists and authorities, so they began trying to determine the cause of such a sudden die-off. After some time, they realized it might be connected to the melting of glaciers. However, no one paid much attention to it, especially an ordinary boy named Jeon Do. He lived a typical gloomy life. He went to school, no one noticed him there, even his parents didn't care, and even teachers didn't call his name during roll call. He had a hobby. He had many ants that he liked to watch and feed. While watching the ants, he listened to a news broadcast where he learned that real chaos had begun on the streets. But he didn't pay attention to it and kept doing the same things as always. After getting dressed, he left his house and went to school. That day, his mother looked unwell and didn't even have the strength to stand up and see him off. But that day, no one came except him and his friend. The boys who were sleeping there didn't talk to him or greet him. It seemed like everyone pretended he didn't exist at all. Even the teacher ignored him and acted as if he didn't exist. That's how all his days passed. He was lonely. It seemed he didn't even understand why he kept coming back there every time. On his way home, he noticed something unusual. His attention was drawn to frightened people running away from something. Then everything changed in a single day. A real apocalypse began. Mutants attacked people, but they completely ignored him. Not only others, even his own mother didn't notice him. Even zombies didn't see him, and they didn't attack him while other people were dying. That was when Jeon Do realized the advantage of being unnoticed, even by monsters. A state of emergency was declared. The real apocalypse had begun. Oh yes, finally something interesting was happening. But actually, there were some benefits to being invisible. After all, no one notices you. And it seemed he didn't care about what happened and even used his situation. For the first time, he was glad no one saw him. He felt sorry for the people who suffered from the zombies. Their lives were ruined. Moreover, the monsters on the streets constantly reminded him of what happened, and he couldn't forget the horrors he witnessed. He sat among mutants, and they didn't pay any attention to him. He had to sleep anywhere, even on the roof of a bus. He slept peacefully, while the entire city suffered from the apocalypse and mutants. Meanwhile, people survived however they could. One girl entered a store, trying to find supplies and food to stay alive. She carefully inspected the store to make sure it was safe. There was a zombie on the table, but it wasn't moving, so she had to keep searching for food and water. She was about to leave the zombie alone when she suddenly heard a sharp sound and swung her arm. But it wasn't a mutant, it was something else. She couldn't see anything. Suddenly, just a few meters away was the main character, the one she hadn't noticed from the beginning. She wanted to carefully approach him, but the bottle in her hand had other plans. Jeon Do heard the sound and turned sharply. His mouth was full of food. He didn't know what to say. Behind him, a monster suddenly stood up. All the monsters began rising, and within a few minutes, the entire store was swarming with mutants. The scene shifted into the past, where she was training until she nearly passed out. She had run quite a distance in a short time. But the coach was never satisfied. The man considered her his worst student, incapable and wasting his time. In anger, he even threw his stopwatch. Then he started yelling that she could do better. After that, he ordered her to run again and suddenly blew his whistle. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and now that same girl was running from monsters. She returned to reality, where she now had to run in order to survive. The grueling training and strict coach paid off. Maybe that's why she survived. The boy didn't hesitate. He realized he had hope. She was the first person who could actually see him. But he didn't get far. He fell face first to the ground and hurt himself badly. He didn't even notice he had tripped over a zombie lying on the ground. Jeon Do lay there for a while. Suddenly, someone approached him and started laughing. It was a small boy, he joked, asking if Jeon Do was planning to sleep there. The teenager got up and immediately walked away, but the boy ran after him. Jeon Do called him Samik and asked if he saw the person who had just escaped from the store, running from the crowd of mutants. But the boy said Jeon Do must have hit his head, because all people had turned into monsters. Jeon Do got angry and told him to go away if he was going to talk nonsense, and the teenager quickly ran off. Jeon Do ran through the streets, looking around to find her. Suddenly, he heard screams. It was her fighting. One monster was aggressively trying to eat her. The girl was cornered, yelling for the monster to leave her alone. At that moment, someone grabbed the zombie and pulled it away. She couldn't believe her eyes, but there was no time to be shocked, so she quickly shut the door. When silence fell, she could finally think about what happened, but there were no answers. Suddenly, she fell sharply to the ground. Landing painfully on her back, it was Jeon Do, who opened the door and accidentally pushed her. He didn't notice her and closed the door. He tried to open another door, but the handle was locked, so he knocked. Suddenly, a knife was pressed against his face. So much for gratitude. She burst into rage. Her body tensed, her movements sharp and dangerous. Jeon Do instantly recognized her and fell silent, stunned that she was alive. He shouted for her to calm down. He called her by name, Myeong. The name hit her like a shock. She froze and stared at him. She couldn't understand how he knew her name. The boy spoke carefully, asking her to calm down because he had just saved her. Gradually, he explained. She might not remember him, but they used to be classmates. Myeong couldn't believe it. She swore she was seeing him for the first time, especially here, among monsters. Jeon Do just got embarrassed and joked that she might have mistaken him for one of the zombies. Both admitted they hadn't seen a living person in a very long time. Slowly, she calmed down and thanked him for saving her. Then Myeong asked why he was even here. It didn't look like he came specifically for her. Jeon Do sighed and finally confessed. He was looking for his mother. He'd been searching for a long time but couldn't manage alone. So he asked for help. Suddenly, Shik appeared at the window and told Jeon Do he was an idiot because they had all become monsters. The boy asked why he had been chasing him. Myeong was in shock, sweat running down her face, unable to believe she was watching Jeong talk to a monster and trying to push him out the window. Even the monster had a surname. Myeong asked him why he was even talking to that monster. At that moment, Shik slipped out of Jeon Do's hands and lunged at Myeong. Instinctively, the girl pulled out her knife to defend herself. She was ready to stab Shik. But suddenly, Jeon Do grabbed the little idiot by the cape and threw him back onto the floor, saving Myeong's life. The boy tried to explain that he hadn't seen any monster. In front of him, there had only been an ordinary kid who was chasing him. He held him tightly and insisted that everything was fine. But suddenly, she heard strange sounds. Myeong's eyes widened, and she realized it was time to get out of this madness. The girl started running, trying to escape the store filled with mutants. She sprinted down the street, but the monsters were catching up, and she kept looking back. Suddenly, one of the monsters lunged at Myeong, but she managed to dodge and sprint in the opposite direction, gaining a small head start. She landed in another courtyard, much quieter. For a moment, she stayed tense, making sure no one was following her. And when she saw that no one was chasing her anymore, she relaxed and calmly entered a building. The house was empty and abandoned. It seemed like no one lived there. She opened the door and collapsed right in the hallway, completely exhausted. The girl was struggling to breathe. She had gone through unbearable stress and understood nothing. Her mind was full of questions. Myeong flinched sharply when she heard a voice behind her. She turned and saw an ordinary-looking man, surprised that the door had been left open. A chill crawled over her skin. Something about the stranger felt unsettling. Only then did she notice the hammer in his hand. On the floor sat a half-naked girl with her hands tied. Red drops were slowly dripping from the hammer. The man stepped forward. Behind him was a thin trail of blood. Myeong felt fear choke her, but she couldn't look away. She panicked and pulled at the door, but it had shut. The man moved toward her slowly. He showed no emotion at all. He stared at his victim with a calm, dead, lifeless gaze. Myeong begged for the door to open. Suddenly, someone switched the lock. It was the man. He calmly asked if Jum had come to the wrong place. In that moment, she felt like her heart might burst out of her chest. He continued speaking calmly, saying that these doors always had problems, especially this one. There was a pause. The man looked at Myeong. He saw the knife and realized she was ready to attack. He turned around and walked away, saying that recently there had been too many problems and he didn't want to get involved anymore. To frighten her, he added that if she got in his way, he wouldn't apologize. Then he asked her to leave peacefully. Myeong slammed the door, and this time it finally opened. The man suddenly stopped, and a smile appeared on his face. He said that she should go, but he wasn't sure she'd be able to escape. She opened the door, and in front of her was a horde of monsters. How had they even managed to get there? Fear froze on her face, but she had no choice. Better to run. Monsters were better than humans. Suddenly, the hammer hovered above her head as if about to strike. Meanwhile, Jeon Do was walking and telling Semic to stop. Semic agreed, but kept following him. Jeon Do repeated that he shouldn't follow. Shik agreed again, yet still kept walking. Jeon Do couldn't take it anymore. He turned around and yelled at the boy to stop and stay in place. He was frustrated that Shik had ruined his only chance to suddenly find his mother. After those words, the boy burst into loud laughter. He told Jeon Do he was ridiculous, because in this chaos there were only monsters outside. It was stupid to think you could find a human here after being unnoticed for so many years. Jeon Do realized that hiding in a crowd wasn't hard. He often forgot they were monsters. Maybe he had become a monster too. Jeon Do said they needed to check and put a helmet on Sem-shik's head. He added that the helmet fit perfectly on his big head. Sem-shik replied that he actually liked it. Then he added that he had been smelling that scent for a long time. Jeon Do asked what smell he was talking about. He couldn't smell something through the helmet. Suddenly, the boy said he could smell that girl they had seen earlier. A smile appeared on Jeon Do's face. Meanwhile, events returned to that strange house. Jumyoung woke up abruptly. She was in some room lying on a bed. There was a rope on her wrist. It looked like she'd been tied up. Her head hurt terribly. She felt like a fire was burning inside her. She saw blood on her fingers. There was a wound on her head. Suddenly, Jumyoung heard a voice apologizing. There was an argument. Someone was trying to escape. While he was gone, she carefully stepped out to see what was happening. The man was holding his victim by the face. She trembled with fear, and he was filled with rage. Then he shoved her away violently. The woman said she wanted to live. The man replied that then she shouldn't have killed his wife, because his wife didn't want to die either. Her hands were tightly tied. She said she couldn't do anything and begged him to let her go. Tears streamed down her face. She was ready to do anything, begging to be released in exchange for a favor. Then the man said he wanted his wife to cook braised kimchi, or better, noodle soup or pickled radish. The poor woman said she would do anything he asked, if there were ingredients. Suddenly, the hammer rose into the air. The man asked how she didn't understand it was impossible. He added they would discuss it when she woke up. Suddenly, the hammer fell right in front of the woman. Then the man collapsed onto the floor, too sharply, as if something had struck him. Jumyoung had hit him with a vase and knocked him out instantly. Meanwhile, Jeon Do was carrying Sem-shik in his arms, and Sem-shik was having a great time. Suddenly, the boy said he could smell that scent again. But Jeon Do didn't react. He just ran faster. Sem-shik noticed something strange and asked why Jeon Do suddenly went silent. Then he started flailing his arms and kicking his legs. Because of that, Jeon Do tripped over some trash and fell loudly. Meanwhile, Sem-shik quickly ran ahead, and Jumyoung was untying the poor girl, trying to understand what was happening. The woman said the man had gotten sick. She explained that when Jumyoung was hit on the head, the lunatic felt sorry for her and carried her to the bedroom. He was simply insane. Jumyoung brought clothes for the girl and told her to get dressed so they could carry the body out. Suddenly, she noticed something. The man woke up and started speaking. He said he was sorry and apologized to his victim. The woman began trembling. He scared her so much she couldn't move, not even from the sound of his voice. The man stood up and asked why they said he was dead. He shouted that she had no conscience and didn't care that she killed his wife. Suddenly, the madman vomited right onto the floor. The girl's hair stood on end. They couldn't believe this was happening for real. The man stretched out a trembling hand and asked if they knew what it was like to lose a beloved wife. His face began to distort. His teeth yellowed, his mouth filled with saliva. He began turning into a monster. The events shifted back to the past. She stood by the window and covered her mouth with her hands. Then she grabbed a knife. The madman with the hammer was banging on the door, begging her to open it. She cried and didn't know what to do. She had been told to wait. Something was happening, and they would return soon. But she understood she wouldn't be able to wait much longer. The monsters were following them. They were in serious danger. The girl heard many screams and knocked on the door. When everything went silent, human cries and sobs could be heard. The girl approached the window. The floor was covered in blood and monster corpses. The man was holding his wife. She watched it all. She felt sorry for the people. But above all, she thought about herself and her own safety. And she had every right to. Because more than anything, she wanted at least a small chance to survive. The story returned to reality. She had to pay the price for wanting to be safe. The man who was turning into a monster wanted to eat his victim and show her what it meant, to lose someone you love. Before he could attack the girl, who could barely move from fear, a pot flew into his head. This time, Jumyoung hit harder. But even that didn't help. The man was still alive. Something had to happen quickly. She thought about the mad monster approaching. Time was running out. Jumyoung had a knife. Suddenly, someone pushed her forward from behind. Jumyoung didn't even notice the betrayal that had just happened. Before she understood what was going on, she was in the monster's arms. The man finally reached his victim. She fell out of the window along with Jum Young's knife, and Jum Young fell too. Meanwhile, the man opened a cupboard that led downward. He shouted that the trash had escaped, so he would cut her legs off when he found her. Then he began dragging Jum Young's body. He threw her violently like garbage. She crashed into iron bars that somehow existed in an ordinary house. The man picked up the knife. Jum Young regained consciousness. He said he had searched for that filth for so long, and she had ruined everything for him. The man admitted he should have killed Jum Young first, and now he intended to fulfill that plan. Suddenly, hands appeared behind him. The man said he had never seen his wife so happy. He told his beloved to eat more slowly, otherwise it would be hard to clean up such a mess. He added that he would make sure she ate, and he kept holding her tightly, refusing to let go. Suddenly, the man collapsed, falling loudly to the floor. A bucket and a hammer stood nearby. Jum Young managed to break free from the monster man's grasp. Suddenly, the man rose again. Now he was completely different. He had transformed into a monster. Jum Young's eyes widened. She didn't know what to do. Her heart pounded wildly. She didn't want to die. The monster approached her, and at that moment she understood she had to act if she wanted to survive. She began searching the floor frantically for the knife. But her hand was grabbed by the wife, and at that moment, Jum Young realized it was the end. The monster's hand gripped her face and pressed it into the metal bars, causing terrible pain and discomfort. She was helpless. Blood splattered across the room. But it was the man's blood, because Jeon Do struck him with an axe. Jum Young immediately began freeing herself from the monster's claws, while Jeon Do stared in shock at what he had done. Jum Young finally pulled her hand free. Then she grabbed the knife, and prepared to continue fighting the enemies surrounding her from all sides. She glanced at the mutants one last time, and at the blood that covered the entire room and floor. Ju Yi-young asked how Jeon Do had found her. She didn't like the answer, that some crazy monster had smelled her scent. Jeon Do defended himself, saying he had just learned how sensitive Samik was to her smell. Jumong asked if he really thought she would thank a monster. Then she added, "Who did he even think she was?" Jeon Do swore he had Samik under control, but right then, Samik was standing behind them, watching. Suddenly, Samik lunged at Jumong from behind. Samik grabbed the girl and started choking her. He held her tightly, and if not for the helmet, he would have already torn her throat apart. Jonggo understood there was little time. He had to stop him from reaching her neck. Jonggo grabbed the monster by the cape, tore him away from Jum Young's neck, and threw him to the ground. Jum Young took the knife and moved towards Samik. She asked Jeon Do if he would be upset if she killed this monster, but the boy asked her to stop. Suddenly, a huge face appeared in the window. Jeon Do froze, not understanding what was happening. A massive hand shattered the window and burst into the room, grabbing Samik. Everything happened incredibly fast. Jeon Do protected Jumong, but Samik was injured. Jumong was in shock. Her heart pounded wildly, and then a massive jaw appeared. The entire window was torn apart. Samik, the monster, was as tall as the entire building. How could such a creature even exist? It seemed to leave. Jeon Do was unharmed, but Jum Young was nowhere to be seen. Several hours passed after the giant's attack. Jumong's head hurt terribly. She felt like she was losing her mind. Jeon Do peeked out the window, looking at the yard, trying to find traces of the monster and the boy. But all that was left of Sem Shik were bloody marks. Jeon Do turned to Jum Young and asked if she knew any safe places. Jeon Do dragged a wardrobe toward the door. Ju objected, saying it was pointless. The monster was gigantic. Jonggo said their house was strong enough, and he believed the monster wouldn't be able to break through the walls. Besides, there was a basement where they could hide and wait out the danger if the mutant returned. She had never seen anything like this before. But luckily, the mutant was dumb enough not to tear the house apart. However, the protagonist didn't want to sit idle and suggested searching the entire house, hoping to find something useful. Suddenly, she turned around and left him. The girl went in a completely different direction without saying a word. She began searching the entire house. She realized she hadn't eaten anything in all this time. After some time, she got lucky and found canned food and supplies. For a moment, she actually felt happy. Without hesitation, she started eating. She was so hungry that she even felt hot. Soon, the whole can was empty. How did all of that even fit inside her? The boy just watched her silently, afraid to interrupt. He sat across from her, unable to believe a girl like her could eat so much. After she ate, she became a bit kinder, so he wanted to talk to her. She was looking for her own mother, someone she had never seen in her life. The protagonist explained that from the very beginning, she was the only living person he had ever managed to see, and he wanted her to tell him about a place where other survivors might be. After his words, she began thinking. It seemed like she was remembering something. She recalled that people might have used schools, hospitals, or other institutions as shelters to hide. But that was a long time ago, and now she wasn't sure if any survivors could still be there. She was talking about his old school, the one he used to go to every day. According to her, there might be living people there. It was the only school in their district, so it was definitely the place she had heard about. The boy was ready to head there right away. But suddenly, she stopped him and thanked him for helping her and even saving her from the mutant boy. However, it was too late. He had already left, and she was alone again. Meanwhile, the main character was already moving through the house, preparing to leave for the school. He regretted wasting so much time and not thinking of this earlier. Suddenly, in the yard, he saw that same boy calling out to him. It looked like he was stuck in the ground and couldn't move, but he had been calling him for a long time and had been there alone. The boy saw that he only had a head, no body, yet he was still alive. He suspected killing them wasn't easy, but this? Nearby lay his helmet, broken and covered in blood. But he had no more time for him, so he was about to leave him there. The head begged the hero, but he simply walked away. Yet at the last moment, he still took the head with him and placed it in his backpack. The whole way, the head wouldn't stop talking, asking where they were going now. The hero tried to explain that they were going to a school, but for the monster, that word was new. He had never heard of such a place before. After some time, he arrived at the schoolyard, where many mutants wandered in search of prey. On the ground lay a bicycle that once belonged to a student. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound behind him, as if something huge had passed just a few meters away. Strangely, the monster in his backpack hadn't heard anything. He looked around the street carefully but heard nothing. And he didn't even notice the giant sitting on the fence watching his every step. All this time, the girl remained in the same house, resting. She lay there thinking about what had happened to her and everything she'd gone through. Suddenly, she heard someone else in the house. It was the main character, appearing as suddenly as always. She asked why he had suddenly decided to come back. Had he changed his mind about searching for other people? She also noticed he was barefoot. His shoes were gone. He saw her and walked straight toward her without answering, and she still didn't understand what had happened to him. Only when she saw his expression did she realize something was definitely wrong. Terrified, she grabbed onto the couch and refused to let go. The main character approached her and threw her to the floor. Strangely, he was very strong at that moment. She tried to get up and hide under the table, but it was too late. In front of her was no longer a boy, but a monster he had turned into. He grabbed her and began biting her leg, refusing to let go. She screamed in pain and begged him to stop. At the same time, she searched for a knife, trying to kill him and save herself. But she understood she was too late. The infection from the bite was already in her blood, and soon she would become a monster just like him. With all her remaining strength, she stabbed him in the back, but it didn't help. He didn't stop. This was the end. In her mind, she had already accepted death. Her leg was crushed. There was a deep wound, and she was bleeding heavily. She had no strength left, and tears appeared on her face. Drool began dripping from her mouth. She herself was mutating, turning into a zombie. Her eyes turned yellow, and slowly she lost all humanity. Suddenly, she woke up. She looked around the house. She was alone. She realized it had only been a nightmare. However, she couldn't calm down for a long time or convince herself that nothing bad had actually happened. She carefully checked her entire body, searching for any signs of infection, but there were none. No bite marks, no wounds. She was healthy. She began thinking about the boy. Despite how suspicious he seemed, she didn't consider him bad. Yet she didn't even know him personally, despite them going to the same school. But something still bothered her. She heard a suspicious sound again, and this time grabbed a knife. Meanwhile, outside the school wandered a gigantic monster. It grabbed another creature passing by carelessly and simply ate it. It looked like pure cannibalism. Jeon Do saw everything. His hand trembled. He couldn't move. The monster calmly devoured its own kind as if it were normal. He squeezed his axe tightly, trying not to draw attention. Suddenly, the creature turned its head and began approaching. Jeon Do froze. His body betrayed him. His legs wouldn't move. He didn't know what to do. Could this monster be different from the others? Could it actually see him? The giant took a step. The boy watched every movement. Its foot crushed a car, as easily as stepping on a pebble. Jeon Do closed his eyes. He braced for the worst. And when he looked again, the monster was gone. It had simply walked past, never noticing him, as always. Meanwhile, Jumyeon climbed the stairs, boiling with anger. How could anyone call this place safe? On the landing, she stopped. A faint sound came from behind a door. The girl approached carefully. Before she could touch the handle, the door opened on its own. Jumyeon tensed, ready to fight. But before her stood a child. They stared at each other. Jumyeon asked who he was, but the boy didn't answer. He simply turned around and walked away. She rushed after him, wanting to understand what he was doing and where he was going. But the boy stubbornly ignored her. He was clearly searching for something. She thought maybe he hadn't heard her and wondered how she could communicate with him. So she wrote 2 questions on a piece of paper. "What's your name?" And "What are you doing?" She showed the paper to the boy, hoping it would help them understand each other. But he only glanced at it and continued in silence. Disappointed, Jumyeon sighed. Suddenly, the boy noticed an exit and headed toward the door. She stopped him with a gesture. He had noticed the exit, because he was staring toward the window, which was open. At that moment, she realized he was planning to leave, but she didn't want to let him go so easily. So she stopped him just as he was about to leave her. She asked if he was hungry, but he seemed not to understand. She used gestures to show she meant food. The boy stared at her for a long time, then quietly nodded. Soon he was sitting at a table while Jumyeon searched the cupboards for anything edible. It seemed she would have to go find food. There was none at all. She examined the cupboards and every shelf in the kitchen. But other than junk, empty bags, and bottles, there was nothing. Meanwhile, Semshik finally exhaled in relief. He was talking to the head and told it about the monster that had almost noticed him and looked ready to eat him. From his words, it became clear that among mutants there were cannibals. So the head was terrified by what it heard. He didn't know what to do next or how to save himself and other people who might still need help. Near the school, he saw a car that caught his attention. Along with that, he felt a familiar sensation that had haunted him before. Without wasting time, he began searching the car, hoping to find something valuable inside. He got lucky. Inside the car was a phone, and he hoped it still worked. There was also an ID card in the phone case. It belonged to a girl who lived in South Korea. The woman seemed familiar to him. Could it be his mother? Was this car hers? Still, he gathered his courage and entered the school. Strangely, there was no one inside. It was silent, and he saw no signs of people. He carefully inspected the first floor but found nothing except abandoned belongings that once belonged to students. After that, he decided to go upstairs and continue searching for other survivors. But again, nothing. Only abandoned items and a shattered phone. Inside the classroom, everything was destroyed. Broken furniture, dirt, and trash covering the floor. Suddenly, he heard human voices. They were busy with something, searching for a sharp object. But all they had were scissors, already dull and unusable. So the woman handed the boy a knife. It turned out they were holding a prisoner and cutting him into pieces. The main character hid and started listening to what was happening. His attention was drawn to a bucket filled with human bones and hair. From their conversation, it became clear. These people were cannibals searching for young flesh, tastier than what they usually had to eat. At that moment, he felt sick and covered his mouth so he wouldn't scream. But the noise he made gave him away. He was breathing loudly and panicking. The woman said it might be zombies and told the boy to check it out before they arrived. The boy snapped, saying she was insane. She still had arms and legs. She replied that all complaints should be directed to Mr. Janami, or he could tell him himself. He got angry but still left. On his way, he muttered that he didn't even know who this Janami was. The man crossed the doorway. He looked around but saw nothing, only a puddle of vomit. He wondered if zombies could vomit since he didn't remember seeing anything like that. The woman replied that monsters could vomit, then asked how the boy had survived this long, adding that he annoyed her. He said there didn't seem to be any zombies there, so the woman told him to go deal with the prisoner. After checking and seeing no one, he turned back. In that moment, the woman turned away and saw nothing. But she heard a strange sound and decided to check what happened. Nervously, she stepped into the hallway. She grabbed a shovel that was near the exit. When she walked out, she couldn't believe her eyes. The boy lay on the floor in a pool of blood. In that moment, someone attacked her too. She looked helpless and foolish, but she hit Jeon Do with the shovel so hard it was like a giant man had struck him. The teenager fell to the ground, trembling all over. He tried to stand, but couldn't. He couldn't force himself to move. The woman said she simply wanted someone younger, and here he was, crawling toward her. She approached Jeon Do and sniffed him, saying something was wrong. He didn't smell human, but he didn't smell like a zombie either. He seemed spoiled, pointless to eat, not nearly as delicious as he looked. Jeon Do started crying and said it was disgusting. With a trembling voice, he asked what they had done to deserve this. The woman laughed and said Jeon Do was too young to understand. In all this chaos, adults had to choose, be human or become monsters. She cursed and said they weren't cannibals. She told him not to misunderstand. This was the only way to find out whether Jeon Do was human or a monster. Saliva dripped from her mouth. It was disgusting. Suddenly, she swung at Jeon Do. He cried and said goodbye to his life. The worst part of the apocalypse, dying at the hands of a human, not a monster. Then the entire room was splattered with blood. The woman threw the shovel. She didn't need it anymore. Suddenly, she noticed something moving inside his backpack. She thought it was a cat. People like her didn't care what they ate. She opened the backpack. Shik lunged at her. The woman screamed and ran out of the room. She tripped over her food partner and fell. Meanwhile, Jeon Do regained consciousness. Loud screams brought him back. He had lost a lot of blood and was in terrible pain, but still managed to get up. He had no choice. He stepped into the hallway. There were two bodies. The hideous woman's mangled face. She truly deserved that death. Shik was beside her. He laughed and said he hadn't eaten in a long time. He spoke to Jeon Do with a grin. He said that no matter how much he ate, he could never feel full. Sometimes Shik terrified him. At that moment, the man, the food target, regained consciousness. He was shocked that Jeon Do survived such blood loss. He didn't remember him from the moment when the teenager tried to free him. The man explained that would have been a bad idea. He believed he was infected long ago by those damned cannibals. He didn't even know if he truly was. He noticed Jeon Do looked very sad. The man began crying. He said the boy had someone he needed to meet before. He abruptly fell silent, as if forever. Jang-gu noticed a huge pile of clothes. There was so much of it that it broke his heart. The teenager began rummaging through the clothing. Thankfully, his mother's clothes were not among them. Then where was she? And where had she gone? Jeon Do found a radio among the items. He couldn't tell if it was turned off. He thought he heard voices. Jeon Do decided to escape this nightmare. Semik asked where they were going. The teenager replied he wanted to rest. He was exhausted. Suddenly, Semik said he smelled humans again. Jeon Do turned around and couldn't believe his eyes. Because inside the bus sat a girl, trembling and begging for help. It seemed she was the one who pushed him. Meanwhile, the cannibal woke up, his body shaking as he tried to stand, dizzy from the effort. He didn't notice the monster in front of him at all. At that moment, someone entered. The cannibal recognized Janami. He begged Janami to remove that disgusting thing from him. The boy also recognized his aunt, Moonba. He approached carefully and said he spared his life to help his aunt. He sat beside them and remarked what a rude and pathetic boy he was. The cannibal was terrified, stammering, begging him to stop joking and just kill him. Shocked, the boy coldly said he didn't want to. He wanted to watch this cannibal die. Ham sat by the wall and apologized for being late. When everyone turned away, she was the only one who supported him. Although, to be honest, she wasn't a very good person, but she was smarter and stronger than the others. Still, she didn't deserve to die at the hands of some idiot who didn't even know what was happening. He promised to avenge this bastard, because his aunt would have done the same. He asked her who that person was. Jung sat on the bed trying to fix the radio, which seemed broken. But nothing worked. So she gave up and left the room again. Young was surprised. Where had he gone? In the hallway, she saw the small boy. He was staring out the window at the monster. And he didn't seem scared at all. Young quickly closed the curtains to block the horror. Then she put the boy on the bed and asked him something. But she realized the boy wasn't afraid, so there was no point scolding him. The house was solid and strong, but it had too many windows. She decided to name the boy Nuna, since older girls addressed younger boys that way. She asked him to stay in the room while she figured things out. Young went down into the basement. So much had happened in 2 days that she had completely forgotten about getting rid of the bodies. but she decided to first check the room down there. She was shocked to see so many construction materials. Although it wasn't surprising, in a house like this, they could often come in handy. So Jung grabbed a hammer and some boards. Jung stood on a chair and began boarding up the windows. Now it was better and safer. Finally, Jung finished. There were so many windows in the house, but she managed to handle them all. Meanwhile, Nuna had fallen asleep while she was doing the repairs. The girl felt sorry for the little one, so she decided to move him into a warm bed so he could sleep properly and stay warm. She was surprised that he slept so deeply and nothing seemed to bother him. Suddenly, she heard strange sounds coming from outside. She began going down to the lower floor to hear the sounds more clearly and understand what was actually happening. It turned out there were people near the house arguing about whether they should go inside or just turn back and leave. As she got closer, she could hear what they were talking about. The voice sounded very familiar, as if she had heard it before. Meanwhile, the main character was looking at the girl sitting in the bus. The stranger trembled near the entrance and was very scared. She was looking at the boy standing outside and staring at her. He wanted to help, but didn't know what to do, so he simply apologized. When he spoke, she got frightened, not knowing his intentions or what he wanted to do to her. Besides, there was a zombie in the bus who seemed to be trying to reach the girl because he could smell her. He had no choice but to finish it off. And after he killed it, he approached her to try and help. But even that didn't convince her, so he started telling her about his house and that it was safe there. Now they were standing in front of his house and knocking on the door, trying to get the girl inside to let them in. However, she didn't believe them and said this wasn't the only house. They could look for other places. Suddenly, the door opened by itself. But when the girl saw her in front of her, she immediately pressed herself against the wall and called her a traitor. The traitor tried to justify herself, but Jumi was fed up and simply threw her to the floor. She said she had doubted it, but now she was sure that she really was a bad person. Jung was furious and asked what the traitor had to say now that she had also lost her mind. Suddenly, Sam-sik spoke up. He said the place smelled really good, and there was so much stuff here. Jeon Do told him to be quieter. Suddenly, the bedroom door opened. Nuna came out and witnessed what was happening in the house. The stranger recognized him, and the boy recognized her. It seemed they had seen each other before. The woman couldn't believe her eyes. Carefully and slowly, she stood up and began approaching him. She burst into tears and said she was so happy he survived. Then she hugged him tightly and said she was very sorry. They stood like that for a while, as the traitor cried and apologized to the child. Then Jung asked Jeon Do what happened to him. Right then, someone spoke over the radio and asked if anyone could hear them. Suddenly, the story shifted back into the past. On the playground, it seemed like the best time in life, real childhood, but not for everyone. Even here, Jeon Do remained unnoticed. The kids ran and played while he always lagged behind. No one even talked to him. It felt like others didn't notice him at all. Suddenly, Jeon Do decided to change that and climbed up. The kids noticed he had climbed onto the slide. Jeon Do stood higher than everyone else, and finally people paid attention to him. He stood at the very top, looking at the other children pointing their fingers at him. Then the poor boy slipped and fell. Someone asked why he was lying there, and the boy woke up. Others called to him, like, catch the bugs. But Jeon Do didn't understand who was calling. The boy opened his eyes and screamed in fear, cold sweat dripping down his face. He couldn't move. His hands were tied. It was unclear whether this was a strange dream or a memory. In the memory, Jeon Do was tied to a wall in a room with bodies. Something was wrong back then. He tried to escape and understand what happened. Maybe he did something wrong, but he couldn't know. He was tied too tightly. The last thing he remembered was Jumi leaping at that girl. Then his memory went blank. Suddenly the door opened and someone entered with an axe. It was Jeon. Jeon Do asked if what Jung suspected was true, because he had never killed anyone. Jung replied that she was asking because she didn't understand anything herself. He knew too much about her and was even right about her father. Jeon Do explained that it seemed like someone was talking about her, so he took the radio. He added that he found the radio at the school and thought it might help him find his mother. Jumi asked where exactly he found the radio and why her father was even at the school. Jeon Do suggested they go there together, even though it was much more dangerous than it seemed. He insisted Jumi shouldn't go alone and clearly remembered the classroom where he found the radio. He suggested going together if Jeon Do didn't mind, so the teenagers left the house. Jeon Do asked if they could leave the child alone. Jumi said she didn't plan on becoming a mother. They stayed in the house for a while to rest, while the other teens had already reached the school. Jeon Do checked everything around and said it was clear, so they headed to the schoolyard. The sun was setting, making the place especially dangerous. So, taking the chance, they began moving toward that same classroom. The same boy was wandering through the hallway. The whole time, he was tense and couldn't stop thinking. Because he didn't know how to get revenge if he didn't even know who killed her. It frustrated him, even if he found that person. How could he be sure it was the right one? There were no clues, and he didn't want to kill someone innocent. He sat in the classroom thinking about it and finally decided he wasn't too upset. He had already avenged many others. Just then he heard a noise and jumped up. Meanwhile, the teens reached the same floor, but there were no bodies and no monsters. She moved slowly and carefully, not wanting to draw attention. They arrived, and the boy pointed to the same spot where everything had happened. Myeong immediately sensed a horrible sharp smell. She even covered her nose with her hand. She couldn't stand it. Then she saw a bucket filled with human bones. Even for her, it was too much. They stepped carefully into the classroom and froze at the entrance to look around before going further. Suddenly, Jeon Do noticed that the old man who had been sitting there had actually turned into a monster. His place was empty. He had simply disappeared, and no one was there anymore. Jeon Do pointed to a pile of things. That was where he found the radio. Myeong didn't know what exactly her father had been carrying. Suddenly, Jeon Do remembered how the man cried and asked if the teenager had also lost someone close. Then Jeon Do asked Myeong what her father looked like. A pause settled between them. No one dared to speak first and break the silence. Myeong was searching for her father and asked Jeon Do if he had seen an old man. The boy wasn't sure. He only remembered a man tied to a chair. Jeon Do explained that some lunatics had stormed into that room. They tortured that man almost to death. He barely managed to stop them. He wanted to save the victim, but it was already too late. At those words, he suddenly fell silent. Myeong grew angry and demanded he continue, but Jeon Do tensed up. Someone was listening to their conversation. A stranger appeared in the doorway with a smile as if he knew some important truth. He hinted that he knew who the killer was and wasn't planning to hide it. He politely greeted them and glanced at Jeon Do, remembering Aunt Moonbok's death and refusing to believe the boy could be involved. The stranger looked quiet and harmless. Suddenly, the stranger pulled out a sword. Myeong asked if Jeon Do knew that man, but he only shook his head. The girl tensed up, ready to defend herself, holding a hammer in her hands. The main character couldn't understand why the guy suddenly decided to fight him, since he had never seen him before in his life. Besides, he didn't even know Aunt Moonbok. The man laughed and said he thought about killing both of them so Jeon Do wouldn't be alone on his way to see his aunt, and offered them to choose who would die first. But they stayed silent. No one answered. So Gam decided himself. He jumped from above and lunged at them. Jeon Do barely dodged. It was unclear where he suddenly got such agility. Gam moved like it was a game. His eyes narrowed and his voice trembled with excitement. A blow to the stomach sent Jeon Do flying backward, hitting the wall. A hammer whistled through the air. Gam leaned on his sword and calmly dodged Myeong's attack. She didn't expect such speed. Her previous enemies were slow, dumb monsters. Gam laughed, jumped again, and lunged at her. Jeon Do struck him in the back, and the opponent was so surprised he dropped the katana. Myeong grabbed the hammer and swung it. But Gam kicked her from behind. The movement was precise, as if he had predicted it. Now she was behind him, lying on the floor. He grabbed Jeon Do by the throat and lifted him into the air, saying he didn't hate the boy. He was just hungry. The main hero began choking, but Gam didn't let him go and kept holding him in that painful position. Foam leaked from his mouth. It was clear he was infected and the virus was already in his blood. Terrified, the main hero started trembling. He didn't want to become a mutant, too. And at that moment, the boy bit him. Blood splattered across the floor. Jeon Do froze in shock, unable to understand what was happening. Hanin twisted his face in disgust, saying it tasted weird and awful. He sat on the floor while his enemy struggled to figure out who he was really facing and why it tasted so bad. Because even though he looked like a normal human, he clearly wasn't one. Then Hanin smiled. His voice sounded warmer, almost cheerful. He said that Jeon Do was just like them, because he had been searching for someone similar for a long time. Jeon Do stood confused and terrified, not understanding what he actually was. From his words, it seemed like Hanin considered him one of the cannibals. At that moment, the girl didn't hesitate. She prepared to strike, and managed to slice his head and deal a serious blow. Young was shocked by what happened. She had to let go of the sword. Her hands were trembling. The sword remained stuck in his head. Hanin collapsed. After such a wound, almost no one survived.